Okay, here we go. The question is cosmology. How do we find out cosmology if we don't know where to look for it?
I think it's in the slides, isn't it? Like one of the first lessons we did.
Okay, it's in the slides. That's a good start. Which slides would they be in? You said the first ones. Do you remember what it's talking about?
It was
I'd
the
say,
introduction class, I think, the first one we did.
yeah. And you guys can see the slides now, right? You can see my screen still?
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's at the top here, right? At the top means it's pretty early, right? Buddha is early, Tenzin Gyatso is early, Three Jewels is early. So let's go to the first slide, right? Remember this? All the way back at the beginning of the semester. So we had the life story of the Buddha, or no, sorry, the blind man and the elephant. We have the Three Jewels. Remember this, right? This is way back in the day. Then we keep going through Buddhist cosmology. Boom, there it is, right? So that word might show up in the book, but this is really straight from the slides, right? And like I told you before, the way I want you to study for this exam, the way I would study for this exam is using the slides, right? So if I don't know where this term is, I would, of course, download all the slides. Actually, I've invited all of the Buddhism students. So I don't know if you're all from the 35461 class, the nighttime class, but we only have a pretty limited number of slides to search through. You can download the PDF. You can, even if you're too lazy to look, you can just search for cosmology, and then there it is, right? It shows up, but it doesn't give you definition. So this one's a little bit tricky. What is cosmology? Did you take notes about this in class?
Isn't it like the study of the universe?
Study of the universe, yeah. And more specifically, what does time look like? Remember, we talked about Buddhist time being kind of infinite in both directions. What sorts of beings exist in the world, right? The six realms and all the different beings in those realms. And then one that we didn't focus on too much is space. What does space look like for this system? And so we don't have to talk about space, but I think definitely the beings are important, right? Because those show up here. We've got the six realms, the six kinds of beings. And so then we talked about those and all the different characteristics. So cosmology is just referring to this system, right? What do the Buddhists think about when they think about the universe? How's that sound?
Yeah, that was perfect. Thank you for that. I was
Okay,
just confused as to like, because when I look at cosmology, I think of like space and stuff. But yeah, no, I remember now.
Yeah, exactly. So the cosmos does mean space and stuff, but the connection is just, yeah, how do you look at the world is another way to think about it. Another synonym for that is worldview that sometimes people use. I think that comes from a German word. Okay, other questions?
For vow, is that like specifically like the vow of the Buddha, or is it just like what a vow is in general?
Well, I mean, for all of these, you kind of want to know both, right? General is good, like cosmology in general, looking that up and knowing what it means, right? But then specifically, how does it relate to Buddhism? It's good to know that too. So vow, it's good to know what it generally means. I think we've talked about this a lot, right? It's some kind of promise. What does it mean in Buddhism specifically?
Isn't it that the Buddha, in his previous lives, made a vow that he would end suffering?
Yeah. Let's see. Was that here? No, that would be after the Karma Tales, right? So that'd be when we're actually reading the life story of the Buddha, but pretty early on, isn't it? Do you remember? Yeah, here we go. So this one's tricky too, because the word vow doesn't show up here. Again, you sort of have to come to class, take notes, generally know what's going on. But like Stephen said, the Buddha made a vow before his final life. So this was before he's even born yet, right? Where is he before he's born?
he was in heaven because he was a god in his previous
Yeah,
life.
exactly. He's a god up in heaven. So just like we talked about here, right? He's up in this highest realm up here, looking down at all the other realms and thinking about how messed up they are, thinking about how they all need some help. He takes a vow. What does he vow? He'll liberate from suffering all those who are not liberated from suffering. He's going to help people, right? That's basically what he wants to do. So how does he make good on his vow? Is he comes down to the world and he does what he can to try to help people. Would you say he achieves his goal? We never really
Yeah, I
talked
would
about that,
say
but it's worth
'cause
thinking
he,
about.
he does he does find enlightenment and like show some people how to attain it. Like he provides the path.
I think that's a great answer, right? So he achieves enlightenment. He figures it out, right? That's the hardest part is figuring out this path. And then he starts teaching it to some other people. Does that mean he liberated every being from suffering? Absolutely not, right? And so we learn that toward the end of his life, Mara kind of taunts him and says, "Hey, Buddha, isn't it time for you to die?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I've trained like this small number of people. He picks up some dirt, and then he's like, "But the people I haven't trained are like all the soil in the world compared to this little bit of dirt," right? So even though he did achieve his goal to a certain degree, the work is not done, right? And it continues to this day. You could even say so. People still take this kind of vow. It's we'll talk about it a bit more later in the class, but this kind of compassionate motivation to achieve enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings is a very common vow that a lot of people take throughout the Buddhist world. Okay, very good. What else?
What's that word under vow? The emanitation? Emanitation?
Emanation. Yeah, we didn't talk about that too much, but again, you can kind of search for it and find it. Um, so here it is showing up with the 4 sights. What were the 4 sights? Do you remember what those were?
Was dead man, sick man, old man, and the holy man.
Yeah, good. And so he sees a person afflicted with the pains of aging, right? So that's the old person. The man was in fact an emanation produced by the gods through the power of the Bodhisattva himself. It's a little bit of a throwaway line, but I think it'll help us understand what's going on here. So I guess first of all, did anybody look up what an emanation is? Do you guys know what an emanation is? The verb would be to emanate.
I think I know what it means. Is it kind of like to like simulate?
You're a little quiet there, Aiden. Did you say like simulate?
Oh yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, like is it close to simulate? Something like that?
Yeah, something like that. It's almost like to emit something, an abstract but perceptible thing that issues or originates from a source, right? So we could also just look up emanate. So that's again the verb form, issue or spread out from a source, right? So it's a little bit of a confusing term, but we have this hologram almost, this thing that isn't really real. It's like an illusion that's being produced by the gods through the power of the Bodhisattva himself. So it's almost like the prince is tricking himself into seeing this old person. Now, why is that part of this story? How do we make sense of that? So in the Hollywood version is very straightforward. Keanu Reeves, he was the prince. He saw the old men. He was disturbed by it. He chased after them. In the book version, first of all, we have the gods, right? So the gods are involved. That's one big difference that we saw really throughout those 2 stories. The Hollywood version would take out the gods, and the book version would really focus on the gods. So it's worth thinking about, what is the role of the gods here? And so even if we take this thing about the emanation from the power of the Bodhisattva, if we just think about the gods, what are the gods doing here? What would you say is the intervention from the gods?
They're the ones showing him all these things.
Right. It's not just like random chance. It's not nature or I don't know. Yeah, just serendipity or something like that. The gods are making it happen. They're orchestrating this series of events that will lead to the Buddha leaving from his home, right? And so, hopefully that's pretty clear. The gods are kind of sending this image to get the 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 bodhisattva at this point, or the Siddhartha, outside of the castle, kind of like how Greek gods are depicted. Yeah, exactly. So just like Greek gods come in and meddle in the affairs of mortal people, the really we could call them the Hindu gods, or really the Buddhist gods too, the same gods, they're meddling in affairs here. Do we have any gods on the review sheet? I think I put one. Yeah, Brahma. So Brahma is a god. We could just think this is Brahma. So Brahma's coming in and kind of meddling with the affairs of Siddhartha and showing him this old person, even though it's not a real old person, right? So it's an emanation of an old person. Now, what about this last part? Through the power of the Bodhisattva himself. Why do you think that's part of the conversation? That one's tricky, and it kind of ties in with maybe we can rewind a little bit. I guess it'd be the very early part of this. It ties in with the idea that the Buddha represents many things, right? Oh yeah, this part. So the Buddha, he was a human. So again, just like Keanu Reeves, he was sort of lost and confused, and he would struggle and all that sort of thing. He was a god, like we already talked about, before he was born into his life as a prince. He was a god. He's a bodhisattva. What, I guess first let's talk about that. What does it mean to be a bodhisattva?
Isn't that like someone like searching for enlightenment, but like
Yeah.
not necessarily finding it yet?
Well, yeah, someone who's on the path, exactly. So again, I think in terms of etymologies, I don't know if you guys do, but Bodhi equals enlightenment, and then Sattva is a being. So it's a being who's on the path to enlightenment. That's how I would remember that term. So yeah, the Buddha was a bodhisattva. In a way, he also is the bodhisattva. And then this third one is the confusing one. This idea that the Buddha was, is, ever will be the cosmos. And we paused on that a little bit in class, but it wasn't like a major emphasis. It was always just sort of in the background. And that's what we see here, right? We could understand, where'd it go? This scene without all this emanation stuff. But to really get, especially what this sentence is saying here, we really need to think about the Buddha as being kind of in charge, right? Being behind everything that's happening in this scene. So he is going through the gods to show the sick person. And then as a human, he's almost like acting surprised, right? And why would he ever do that? Again, is to teach us, right? To teach the charioteer who's there with him to basically act out this story for us, almost like he's an actor in a play. You know, all the world's a stage. And so on the face of it, this is just kind of a silly prince who's never seen any old people in the world, and it's a little hard to believe. But on another level, another way to think about it is this is the Buddha unfolding a meaningful play, right, for all the world to see. And so then you can. It sounds a little like a little bit of a stretch, but then you can apply that same interpretation to all the people around you, right? And so you know, maybe one of you is really an enlightened Buddha, and you're just chilling in the background and waiting for the right moment to make the great comment or something like that, right? And then you will enlighten me, right? And you will show me things that I've never seen before. So it's a very common trope in a lot of Buddhist stories, is to have people who seem like kind of low position, then all of a sudden make the big reveal and show that they're actually some sort of god or bodhisattva or something like that. So anyways, I wouldn't think about it too much. It just it's a word we encountered. It's kind of an interesting English word, and it makes you think about this other layer of the book, right? This other layer of the life story of the Buddha, that there are these illusions and emanations that are operating all over the place. But as you can see, it doesn't only show up here, but it's not like a major part of the story, right? You could still understand the story without focusing on this word too much. How's that sound?
Are we gonna need to know like the Buddha's battle with Mara?
Yeah.
Okay,
what
can you,
what do you think we're gonna need to know about that?
I guess just kind of like the end, like we don't need to know the specific battles, but kind of just like the end result, maybe, like just that he.
Do we have to know like the temptations about it and then how Mara tempted him?
Well, so here's what I recommend. So like here we've got Mara, and we've got the Earth, and we've got Siddhartha, and we've got Shakyamuni Buddha, right? All of those kind of come together in this one scene. So one way you could study for this is think about how things link up with each other, right? Enlightenment's part of that conversation. I would argue the three poisons are. That's a little more interpretive, but I think you can make that argument too. So, you're asking me like, how much detail do you need to know? And I would just say as much as you can, right? This is an exam, and I'm asking you to know the material that we covered in class. So the perfect student would know every detail from the entire book and from all the slides. Of course, that's impossible. And so you do the best you can, right? That being said, I wouldn't say it's a very complicated scene, is it? Or do you feel concerned that you're going to miss something or something, or what's the problem with that one?
Yeah,
Do
I
you have a
just feel
more
like
specific
it's,
question? Go ahead.
I don't know, just kind of like I don't remember everything about it, and like, yeah, I'm not sure if it was in the notes and like what slide it would be on, I guess, or like kind of
Okay,
like maybe.
that's a good thought. So, if we think about the life story of the Buddha, he's the young man, and he leaves home, and he's an ascetic, and then he achieves enlightenment. So it's probably the next one. So let's give it a try. Um, yeah. So then he has the battles with Mara, right? And so we can talk about all of the details. We could watch the video. I don't think we need to watch the video together. But we had a discussion period about this, right? Basically, like, what obstacles does Siddhartha overcome in order to become the awakened one? So you probably have some notes on that if you were taking notes. And I'm happy to go over those notes and those details with you. Are you just asking me to tell the story of Mara and what happened here, or what? I guess I'm still not sure what your question is.
No, I just can't remember which slide it was under. I feel like
Okay,
that
so
was
yeah,
something
that would be
important.
the 16. And Patrick, are you in the nighttime class?
Yeah, nighttime.
Yeah, I think all of you guys are. So yeah, then there's another class that meets earlier in the day, and they have a slightly different schedule. But yeah, this would be the 16th for you guys. What obstacles did Siddhartha overcome in order to become the awakened one, right? So that's something we discussed. And we talked about it in terms of the scene sitting under the tree. So the first scene is there are the daughters of Mara, right? And we talked about them recently in terms of misogyny. Here's a slightly less misogynistic depiction. There are these very small, kind of, conservatively dressed women here, so they're not nearly as sexy as in the movie or in the other picture we were looking at. And so what's sort of the obstacle that they represent? What's going on with that scene?
Overcoming like sexual desire.
Yeah, exactly. So we could say desire in general, but sexual desire definitely. We could call it lust. We could call it greed. We could call it attachment. There are a lot of synonyms for it. And I think this is something I didn't really hammer in class. I didn't like really emphasize it, but in a way, it just comes down to these three poisons, these three negative emotions. So what was the representation for hatred in that scene, or anger, or maybe fear. Those are all, they all kind of collapse into each other.
Would it be like
Was
the
it the-
wars? Yeah, the war scene.
Yeah, it's these guys trying to attack him, right? So again, what happens when you're afraid is then you either run away or you get angry and you fight back, right? So it's just taking that other kind of very deeply rooted emotional response that we often have, right? And then the last one is ignorance, and that in the movie was Siddhartha talking to himself, right? Keanu Reeves talking to himself. In the book, it was a little more. Um, it was a little more just like he came to realize all this knowledge and that sort of thing. It's a little harder to pick that on the screen, I think. And there's this moment where he touches the earth. That was part of it. So there are a lot of details in this scene. I think whoever it was, Patrick's question is a good one. It's just like, yeah, do we need to know the scene? Absolutely. How many details do you need to know? You know, as much as you can, right? Because there's a lot to it, and a big part of this class is you getting out from it what you know, what we talk about in class, what you read, what you see in any of the clips that we watch, right? And so I can't necessarily tell you every little thing that I want you to know, right? That's kind of up to you to decide what is important in the scene based on discussions we have in class. So these are obviously the things that I think are important, the things I say in class, right? The notes that you take. So yeah, you learn as much as you can, you do your best. And I think we covered a lot of things that are pretty good. So just to reiterate, we know who Mara is, we know who Siddhartha is, he's the prince, right? He becomes the Buddha in this scene. So it's like the big climactic enlightenment scene. Where does the earth come in? He touches the earth. Why does he touch the earth? I think we talked about this in class, but it's good to reiterate. Why is he doing that? Why is he touching the earth? Turn the light on.
Does he call on a witness?
Yeah, exactly. He's calling on the earth as his witness. So those are all details coming from this scene. And he overcomes these 3 poisons, these negative emotions. You could also say that too. Yeah. Okay. Good. Other questions about that or other things?
Tenzin Chogyal is just the author, right?
Yeah, he's the author of the book.
Okay.
He's Tibetan. He wrote this about 300 or 400 years ago. We didn't really talk about him very much, but one thing I think is important when you read a book, you got to know who the author is, right? So that's why I added him to the list. And it's something we didn't say in class very much. I thought I did mention it somewhere, but oh yeah, there it is, Tenzin Chogyal. And so I think when we covered this slide, I introduced him a little bit. But yeah, just, you know, so you know who wrote it, right? It's there in the cover.
Do we need to know about Angumala? Or since we didn't cover it, is that not needed?
So we'll get to him on Monday. So things we didn't do yet are Angulimala and the Rhinoceros Horn Sutra, and that's it. Everything else we covered in some capacity. I don't know if I explicitly said the word bhikshuni yet. We'll talk more about monks and nuns Monday. So basically, he becomes a monk. He's like a murderer. That's why his name is Finger Necklace, is he's making a necklace out of the fingers of his victims. And then he converts to become a monk. And then this is about sort of being solitary in Buddhism and how that is a thing that is emphasized, but it's also not the only way to be a monk, right? We often think about monks as sort of being alone, being away from others, but in reality, it's actually kind of a very social institution. But then this book does talk about why it's important to be alone. So, you know, very appropriate for our quarantine days. Other questions?
Who is Sujata again?
Sujata, yeah. She's not a big character, which is probably why you don't remember her. Does anybody remember her?
Was that the one that gave him the porridge that gave him like sort of understanding of the middle way?
Yes, she is. Yeah, so here she is depicted here. Uh, it was a short scene, but the slide gives you page 49 if you want to read it. I guess it's a little bit after that. Yeah, and so chapter 8 at the beginning, the diamond throne, there's the part where it says Sujata's gift. So it's only like a page long, so you can read through it if you want the details. But she gives him food, just like Stephen said, finds the middle way. So she's important, right? Because she represents this moment where he's coming back from this really strict, disciplined life. Other questions? Aiden's good. All right. Yeah, well, I don't know whether to say this is like an easy or hard exam. I'm not trying to make it hard. Sometimes I don't think my exams are hard and my students say that they're hard. The main thing will be manage your time, right? That's my biggest advice to you, is because when I'm grading, frankly, I want you to do well, right? I want to give you the points. And so if you give me like any reason to give you points, I'll give them to you. But sometimes you run out of time and you miss like the 20-point questions at the end, and then you're kind of screwed, right? So the main thing I would say is manage your time. I think somebody asked about how many questions. Maybe I can just tell you that now. There'll be 10 quotation IDs, and so those should be relatively quick. That being said, each of them, I guess a better word is quotation explanations. I think that's what I call them on the exam itself. So there'll be a quote. I'll ask you, almost every one of them has some version of who is the speaker and then what are they talking about, right? So there's like one identification, basically one word answer. It's not like a complete sentence or anything. It's just like, who said this? Okay, the Buddha said it. Who did they say it to? They said it to Mara or whatever. And then usually there's like ABC, there's a C question that's like, what does it mean? Something like that, something a little more interpretive, but not longer than like a sentence, So it's basically word, sentence. If you give yourself, 2 or 3 minutes for each of those, it'll take you a half hour and you'll have tons of time for the final part. It'll be 75 minutes. So I'll give you 45 minutes for the final part. If you take 5 minutes or 10 minutes on each one, you'll still have time, but that is starting to get to be too much. 10 minutes is definitely too much. So again, it'll be open book. So if you need to look up stuff, if some of them take you a little longer than others, that's also fine. Some of them, if you already know the answers, will be like less than a minute, right? You can go through them very, very quickly. And then the second part will be the short essay questions. And so those will be more analytical. I'll ask you to write a paragraph or two to explain yourself. And so that will take a little more time. So it'll all be about time management, because what you really don't want to do is get to the end and not have any time left for the big point questions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Is it only going to be one short answer question or two?
There will be 3 options, and I'll ask you to choose 2 of them. So you'll end up writing 2.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, if you're all good, Aiden, then you're welcome to stay and hang out, or you can go, or it's wide open. I plan to stick around if you guys want to keep talking for maybe like another 20 minutes or something, you know, about an hour total. So if nobody has any more questions, we can call it a day too. But I gave you guys an hour in my schedule today. So yeah, if you have any more questions, we can keep going.
Thank you for doing this for us. I appreciate
Yeah.
that.
My pleasure.
I took notes of everything, so I think I'm good. But
Okay.
thank you. Have a
Yeah,
good
you're
weekend.
welcome. Yeah, see you later. And the other thing too is we'll actually no, sorry, I might have said we're gonna meet on Monday, but that's the other class. My mind is a little scrambled when it comes to the two classes. So yeah, we will have the exam on Tuesday for the evening class, right, on Tuesday 3/2. Okay, you're welcome, Ciara. Yeah, does anybody else have questions? Are you guys all good?
I just have one last question.
Sure.
About the blind men and the elephant. Is that just like about like perspective and like how everybody has like their own view of like I guess the universe and
Yeah.
Buddhism? I
So
guess.
what's the deal with the blind man and the elephant? So that was like the first day. Remember that? And it sounds like you know the story pretty well, right? So what? I guess if I asked you to tell the story of the blind man and the elephant, what would you say, Patrick?
It was like I don't know, a group of blind men were like touching an elephant, and each one of them like felt different parts, and they felt like I guess one touched the trunk, one touched the ear, the leg, you know,
Mhm.
and they all gave their own like opinion as if theirs was like the right one,
Yeah,
but
good.
obviously it wasn't.
Yeah. Well, and
It
they're
was,
not
but just from
wrong.
a certain point.
Right. Let's see. So then we listened to this British guy kind of retell the story, and this was his conclusion. He says, so oft in theologic wars, the disputants I ween rail on in utter ignorance of what each other mean, and prate about an elephant not one of them has seen. So let's say you, me, and Steven encounter an elephant. You know, I touch the tail and I say, oh, the elephant is very much like a rope, right? And you touch the trunk and you say the elephant is very much like a stake. And Stevens touches the tusk and says the elephant is very much like a spear. And so then we're all correct in a way from our very specific perspectives, right? But by saying that our very specific perspective applies to the entire elephant, we are actually missing the point, right? You see what I'm saying? So now the question is what does this have to do with the study of Buddhism? And so that's the more interpretive part. Oh, Mackenzie left. Okay, goodbye, Mackenzie. Um, yeah, so how does this connect to the study of Buddhism? Can you make sense of that?
Is it that like people like interpret Buddhism just based on like simple facts and like they do like some people think Buddhism is just about karma, but other people think it's just about reincarnation or something like
Yeah,
that, or
yeah.
enlightenment.
That's a good way to think about it. Yeah. And another way is there all these other elements that Ninian Smart went through. This from the Keown reading. And so let's see, I don't know if I give you a page number. I guess it's just page 1 and the first 10 pages or so cover this material. Yeah, some people might focus on the philosophy, right? And say, oh yeah, the Four Noble Truths. That's what Buddhism's really about, right? But that ignores a bunch of stuff. That ignores, let's say, the ritual aspects of Buddhism, right? The Four Noble Truths is not about ritual. It ignores the narrative, right? We've spent a lot of this class reading narratives. We'll switch it up a bit going into the next part, but we've read a lot of stories, right? So myths and narratives, experiences, emotions, various social institutions and so forth, right? The monks and the nuns, the material culture, the relics, the stupas. And so we can kind of hold on to any one of these parts and say, yeah, that's what Buddhism is. But to ignore the others would be just like these blind men and the elephant, right? We really want to get the more full picture to the extent that we can. How's
Okay,
that sound?
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Professor.
Yes.
So the final enlightenment is that so is that when he actually like gets enlightened, or is that when he's like about to die? Because the great going out is kind of throwing me off. Like I feel like that's him dying, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, so there are two words, right? We've got enlightenment, and then we've got the final enlightenment. And as you can see, they both have the word nirvana, right? One is just nirvana, which is the regular enlightenment, and then the other one is parinirvana. And so what's the difference between those? Patrick, do you know?
Um, not really. I
Okay.
think I think like he was saying, like Steven was saying, like one is like the enlightenment underneath the Bodhi tree, and then the other
Mhm.
one is kind of like his death.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think, yeah, I gave this information. I don't know if we emphasized it in class. We might have gone through this a little quickly, but so there's nirvana in this life, right? Enlightenment in this life, which the Buddha achieved as a young man, right? Here he is, Keanu Reeves. And then there's final nirvana, final enlightenment, which he achieved at the age of 80, right? And so, yeah, this final enlightenment is passing away, right? It's when the Buddha dies, and what's special about it, what's final about it, is he doesn't come back, right? There's the sense that he is then really gone. He's really beyond suffering. The cessation of craving, withdrawal from it, renunciation of rejection of it, liberation from it, non-attachment to it. So after that, he's gone like blowing out the candle. We talked about that. I think Stephen and I had an exchange about that, right? So that would be the final enlightenment. If it's just the regular enlightenment, there's a sense that he's not fueling the flame anymore, but there's all this fuel from before, right? So if the flame represents suffering and karma and all of these situations that we get ourselves caught in through our various actions and negative emotions and so forth, then when you achieve enlightenment, you're no longer feeding into those situations. You're no longer committing any acts that would lead to new karma, but you still have residual karma left over from your previous lives and that life up to that point. And so for the rest of his 45 years, he's kind of like going through his final karma. And then by the time he reaches the end of his life, then, he's enlightened, and there's a sense that he could emanate back or something like that, but this body will be gone, right? And his five aggregates, his five factors of, what is it, individuality is what Keown calls it, those would not be coming back to samsara. So, and Stephen said the great going out is maybe throwing him off. So that was language from most recent class. Oh, I hit the wrong thing. Let's do this one. Well, we can do this one too. So we might not have even gotten to this slide, but this is how it was translated. The same term was translated in the case of Gautami, right? It was called her great going out, her parinirvana, her final enlightenment, her great going out. Same meaning, slightly different emphasis. So if you were thrown off by that translation, then it's probably because we used final enlightenment for the other book, but for Gautami, they used this term, great going out.
All right, no,
But
I gotta know.
yeah, she achieved that same state, right? So she's going to the unconditionedness where death and decay are both absent, and one doesn't meet with the unpleasant nor cut off from the pleasant. So she's like achieving the same thing as the Buddha. And again, we didn't get to this last time, but we can start before the exam. We can start with just a quick recap of this. And then the Buddha's like, "Hey, Gautami, you're pretty great. Show everybody how great you are. Do some miracles." And then the narrator says, "Hey, her great going out was positively stellar," right? So it's basically saying her enlightenment was even better than the Buddha's enlightenment. And we would have to go back to figure out why that is, but there's a sense that she even kind of outshines her I guess it'd be her nephew, when she achieved enlightenment.
All right. Thank you, Professor. I'll email you if I have any more problems or questions.
Okay,
Thank
that
you.
sounds good. Yeah. Yeah, have a good weekend, Stephen. I'll see you later. And how about you, Patrick? You got any more questions? I closed that by accident.
I
Anything else you want to talk about?
I'm good, honestly.
Okay.
So, actually, wait. The Eightfold Path is just kind of like the things that Buddhists do to like get onto the path of enlightenment, right?
Yeah, why don't we take a look? So the Eightfold Path, it's a little confusing, but that is part of the Four Noble Truths, right? That is the path part. So if we go to the Four Noble Truth Day, the path, right? Um, it's the final slide of that day. I think we might have started a review with this too, but it's basically there are these 8 things that you can do and that will lead you to enlightenment. One thing I wanted to emphasize is that this is an example of the middle way. Actually, why don't we, my mouse is confusing me. Why don't we open this one? Because I think this is where we actually talked about it more. Yeah, it's the same thing. So the Eightfold Path is a middle way between indulgence and harsh austerity, right? Indulgence and asceticism. So it represents a middle way, but you got to ask, okay, a middle way in what capacity, right? And so then the Buddha says, these are the things you need to focus on. Focus on how you understand the world, why you do the things you do, your resolve, your motivation, how you speak, how you act, your livelihood, your job, right? I think that we talked about that one in class. Your effort. So, are you lazy? Do you work really hard? Your mindfulness. So this is more mindfulness, meditation are very close, but mindfulness is more like how you remember things, and this is very subtle, right? And so, maybe it has to do with sort of being anxious, like a lot of anxiety is thinking about stuff a lot and constantly having these thoughts rushing up against you. So maybe you've heard of mindfulness meditation. Is kind of helps with anxiety. It's letting you practice thinking about things in the right way. And then meditation is more like, what do you focus on, right? So rather than which thoughts are coming and how you remember things, meditation is just your ability to focus on a particular thought, a particular subject for an extended amount of time. So having a good attention span, right? So these clearly are related to each other, but the Buddhists, they like meditation, so they talk about this a lot. So for all of these, the argument is you can bring in a middle way. So because here I didn't list them off or anything, I'm not asking you to remember any of those details, but I do want you to know that it represents this middle way, this path to enlightenment, and then you can go into these details more if you're interested for personal reason.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, because I kind of forgot that the Eightfold Path was part of the or Eightfold Eightfold Path was part of the Four Noble Truths. Like that part
Yeah.
always confuses me. Like that
Wow.
they're like one and the same almost.
Yeah, well, it's good you asked about it. Yeah, it's a list inside of a list, right? So the Four Noble Truths is this list, and then this part of that list expands into this, right? And so then that's got a nice list right there. So I it's a little bit of a joke that there's this list of lists, but Buddhists love lists. I left out some lists right there. I could have put even more lists, but I didn't want to overburden you guys with lists. So I gave you what I thought were the top choices here.
Yeah. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So
Okay.
yeah, and if like Stephen was saying, if I have any problems or questions, I'll email you over the weekend.
Yeah, that sounds good. And I'll dedicate some time at the beginning of class because we have the whole 2.5 hour block. Maybe like a half hour or something. We can just talk about whatever you guys want to talk about, and then I'll go over Angulimala because we haven't talked about him, and then and the rhinoceros horn. So we'll have a little mini lesson, and then you guys can take the exam.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. Well, nice talking with you, Patrick. Have a good weekend.
Yes, you too.
All right, I'll see you on Tuesday.
See it.